right, notify Sharpay. I will take care of Kelsey and the orchestra.
Hold on, Miss D. Think he stopped breathing.
Well, then, give him the Heimlich. It's showtime.
I love Kenny Ortega. He was probably the first director I was ever aware of as a kid. Martin Scorsese got his childhood passion for filmmaking from watching Italian neorealist classics, and I got mine watching the Disney 411 behind-the-scenes featurette on the Cheetah Girls, too. Kenny Ortega's work has had a huge impact on me, both as a storyteller and as a consumer of movie musicals, and so it only seemed right for me to take this opportunity to examine his style and tease out the filmmaking principles that have probably osmosed into my brain anyway through repeated viewings of the High School Musical trilogy. So, who is Kenny Ortega?
Stay there. You are the music in
Kenny Ortega was a choreographer before he was a director. His first experience in choreography for the screen was in 1980 on Xanadu. He continued his film career choreographing for multiple music videos in the 80s and early 90s and had his feature-length directorial debut in 1992 with Newsies. Even in his early work, before he was given the director's chair, his approach to storytelling is clear. He believes that movement is an essential component of story. He does not view dance as an aesthetic form, but rather as a narrative one. Just look at the way that he uses choreography in Material Girl to tell the story of the song. Ortega was given control of not just the dancers, but also the camera. His emphasis on narrative became even more clear. When we think about movie musical directorial styles, a useful foil for Ortega is maybe the Busby Berkeley musicals of the 1930s. These movies would come to a halt for musical numbers, as the editing and cinematography became tools to emphasize the aesthetics of the choreography. The plot would get entirely lost. Even if the plot was as simple as the audience watches a performance, sometimes the audience would disappear entirely for huge swaths of the dance, and the camera would be placed in such a way that even if the audience could see what was happening, they wouldn't really be able to appreciate it. That clip from Footlight Parade is an extreme example, but this general approach to musical storytelling persisted for decades. In Singin' in the Rain, All I Do Is Dream of You occurs in between two plot points, barely interrupted by a single shot of Don watching that feels inserted mostly out of obligation. But Kenny Ortega represents an entirely different approach to musical numbers. They are not breaks from the story, they are opportunities to tell the story. Let's look at Work This Out from High School Musical 2. We'll make things right. The sun will shine if we work. The choreography for the chorus of the song is used to communicate the plot. At first, Troy dances alone while his friends watch on, annoyed, but as he wins them over and convinces them to give the summer job a shot, they join in. The sun will shine, got to work. This use of movement as metaphor advances the story throughout the musical number. And he communicates story with movement even more explicitly in other numbers. In I Don't Dance, the dance is a game of baseball, although a highly stylized one with an unclear number of innings. And in Now or Never, there isn't much literal dancing at all. Instead, the basketball game itself paces and feels like a dance. In Newsies, he even takes this another step further. In Carrying the Banner, the musical number begins with the boys getting ready for work, and then cuts to the folks hard at work at the printing press during a vamp. He includes shots of the newspapers themselves sliding down a ramp, because any movement, be it dance steps or basketball passes or even the mechanical whir of a printing press, can be part of choreography. Carrying the Banner also represents another important tenet in Ortega's approach to choreography. The story never stops for the dance. Carrying the Banner is about getting ready for work the entire time, and as the boys dance in the street, they are always on a mission: get to work. They maybe get there a bit ostentatiously, but they never stop moving towards something. We see this principle in action again in Seize the Day, a number that doesn't really have anything that it's moving towards. It would be very easy to use this as just an isolated moment that happens to express an emotional state, but Ortega wants it to contain plot as well. So he takes care to establish at the top of the scene that the kids are outside playing. He includes an establishing shot of some boys playing marbles, and when the song begins, he highlights these two boys having a fake sword fight. Open the gates and see The choreography of the number then calls back to this sense of play at multiple points, including this tug-of-war moment. When the script didn't call for a specific story beat to be unfolding, Ortega went ahead and created one. For Ortega, every song must be a part of the story. He would never let the story grind to a halt for Debbie Reynolds to sing a song before returning to her argument with Don. The choreography of the song would be their argument. Even in the moments where the plot point that's unfolding is simply Troy and Gabriella sing a song, Ortega takes care to cut away from the performers with regular frequency and show us audience reactions that ground the number in the story. The way Ortega choreographs his dances around narrative is just one element of his relationship with motion, though. He also emphasizes motion in the world around the characters. Rather than choreographing elaborate dances when the characters wouldn't necessarily move, he chooses to move the world around the characters. He rotates the set along different axes depending on the tone in High School Musical 3, and in a more subtle example of the same principle, he uses rocking chairs to introduce motion to a relaxed moment between the Newsies during King of New York.
A mezzanine seat to see the flickers.
Havana cigars that cost a quarter.
These stylized moving pieces also get folded into his transitions between locations. In the Cheetah Girls 2, he uses these cool moving mirrors to transition between rehearsal and performance. And in High School Musical, he uses a shot of a boy operating a fly system to imply that a simple wipe is actually a rising curtain. And of course, the most obvious kind of motion when we're talking about filmmaking is the moving camera, and Kenny Ortega is very comfortable including the frame in his dances. He frequently pans across the scene or tracks with the motion of characters, but the most unique kind of movement that he regularly deploys is a tracking establishing shot. Ortega tends to like busy frames, and he shoots a lot of 2-shots and medium-wide masters, but he rarely opts for a stationary ultra-wide establishing shot to orient us to the space. Instead, we get a moving tour.
Hi, Mom.
Sometimes it's just a subtle pan, but often he'll start with a close shot of an object in the room, usually an object with moving parts, and then we'll pan or track to give us a wider view of the space.
Yo, 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 it's lunchtime! Come on, people, go!
Compliments of Zeke.
This kind of motion is subtle. It's not the bold choreography of front flipping onto home plate, but it reflects an awareness of movement through space, and it speaks to his understanding of motion as the building block of visual storytelling. Kenny Ortega is an astute filmmaker beyond just his awareness of movement. I could have dedicated this entire assignment to just looking at his use of framing in Newsies, or comparing his use of color in Newsies to High School Musical 3 when establishing tone. But his use of movement on every level, from the cameras to the sets to the dancers interacting with them both, is what uniquely elevates his storytelling. As a filmmaker who got his start as a choreographer, Ortega's approach to directing can perhaps even be considered an elevated form of choreography. It's storytelling through motion.